anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be certainly doing our weekend edition. Lots of issues we'll be discussing. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Liberty McArtor with us. She is, of course, our writer as well as the host of the Know Why podcast, as well as Kelly Shackelford, President and CEO, Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. First article here has to do with the Texas Senate passed a bill requiring classrooms to display a Ten Commandments. Now, I remember back in 1980, I was a graduate student in American political theory, and just down the road, the Supreme Court ruled in Stone versus Graham that if they posted the copies of the Ten Commandments, if they would have any effect, it would be to induce the school children to read the Ten Commandments, meditate upon the Ten Commandments, perhaps venerate and even obey the Ten Commandments. Kelly, I thought that was banished from the classrooms, and here, what's going on?
Well, that decision wasn't exactly a standard of excellence. It was what's called a per curiam decision, meaning none of the justices wanted to put their name to it, basically.
Wow.
And it was 5-4. And really all they said is, well, because of Lemon, we're going to strike this down. And it was, again, 5-4 decision. Well, those who listen to Point of View know that in the Coach Kennedy case that we won 2 years ago, the Supreme Court specifically overruled Lemon. So their only basis in that Stone v. Graham for saying that you can't have a Ten Commandments in the classroom, was thrown out. So there's really no basis. Additionally, what they said, okay, if this Lemon test, which we had used to kind of crush any religious, elements of our society, if that's no longer the test, what is the new test? They said it's history and tradition. If something is historically, it's a part of our history or a part of our tradition, well, the Judeo-Christian foundations of the company, the moral and legal structure of our country, the Ten Commandments is part of that history. I mean, really, it's kind of like never educating at all during the school of the Bible and what it is and what it says. The Supreme Court has said that you are doing a really poor job of educating because, if you read Shakespeare, there's over 1,200 biblical references without you knowing they're biblical references. And so this is just basic part of education. If you don't learn the history, the traditions, where America came from, you're not going to understand what this country is. And so the idea that we're going to sort of banish certain parts of our history, our background when it comes to both religion and law and, moral structure and all this, it's now we're turning back. So after we overturned the Kennedy case, Louisiana passed a law to put a Ten Commandments on at every school. Not the monument, but just like a paper deal, just as part of the education. And now Texas is doing the same thing. And I think this is the sort of the bigger picture of all this is, and the short summary of this is I'll say go to rfia.org, restoringfaithinamerica.org, and it will explain what's just happened. We just overturned 50 years of precedent from Lemon. It was cited over 7,000 times to put down religious freedom and religious expression in public, whether it be a nativity scene at Christmas or whatever. All that's gone now, okay? You could do those things now. And so this is what the Texas law that they're in the process of passing, and really you can pass this anywhere, shows you, but it's just one little example of thousands of things you can now do in your own community. So I would tell people go to rfa.org and make sure you get an understanding so you can just start doing stuff in your own community. and bringing faith back to your community.
RFIA, and again, Restoring Faith in America. You can take the Faith Blazer Challenge, restoring the most cherished history and traditions in communities across America. And Liberty, first of all, it was interesting when they ruled that you could not post the Ten Commandments in that classroom in Kentucky. I have it on good authority that they never took those Ten Commandments down. Said, well, you said so, but you can come and take them down. They never did. But I suspect growing up, being homeschooled and then going to Patrick Henry College, you studied the Ten Commandments, and yet many of your peers wouldn't even know what the Ten Commandments are. Is that fair?
Definitely. And it reminds me of the interview that just came out on the Know Why podcast. I interviewed Andrea Crum. She's been on Point of View as well. And we were talking about truth. And I think this is related because up to 60% or something like that of Gen Z believe that truth is relative to what an individual believes. And they believe that truth changes over time. At the same time, they're anxious, they're depressed, and it's because there's no moral framework. And so it's really not freeing to believe in moral relativity and not have a moral framework. We need a foundation. So yes, from the historical literacy perspective, the Bible has influenced the world and the West so much. Even if you're not a Christian, you should at least be familiar with it. To Kelly's point, that should be studied. But I hope that it also sparks some conversations and maybe some thoughts for people who need a moral framework.
Yeah, not that we don't need less stealing and murder and adultery and coveting and, all these different things.
They might actually believe these things. Yes.
Yeah, it's always funny to me, Liberty mentioned this, this idea that truth changes. I mean, the lawyer part of me always wants to say, so is that changing what you just said? I mean, basically, once you get rid of absolutes, you can't even communicate.
Right.
I mean, there
true.
is no truth. Well, you just stated one. We can have misperceptions about what the reality or the truth is, but we need to, and this is what America's about: is provide the information. Let's have the debate. Let's have the discussion. Mm-hmm. Let's don't, say we're going to ban these things. So this is it's a huge deal. What's happened in our country, what God is doing, this change in the religious freedom arena that is allowing much more public display of faith. But it doesn't work if people don't feel the space that God's just opened up to do something. So I would challenge every community in the country, if you're listening to this, you can do things in your own community. You can go to rfia.org, just look at some examples. Every month, I know Andrea Justice, who's running that effort at First Liberty, she puts out a thing every month on here's something you can do. And even just as simple as having a nativity scene at Christmas on your government lawn or, these are things you can do now, and you can start working on those now. So bring faith back to America. We desperately need it.
I might just mention when we come back from the break, okay, well, you can post the 10 Commandments in a classroom. Can you post a crucifix in a workspace, which is a case that he is actually addressing as well? Last week, of course, we also talked about a situation with Ryan Walters and what was going on in Oklahoma. That was Aaron Smith. So we got a lot of things to cover. But and I'll do that quickly because then I suspect a lot of you want to hear what we have to say about the Department of Education, the soon-to-be dismantled Department of Education, the Tesla terrorists, as well as the deportation questions. There's a lot to cover today. We'll do our best. And all that comes up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
For decades, progressive professors and politicians have been promoting universal basic income, known as UBI. It is a fiscal program to pay a regular income to everyone without conditions. Proponents argue that we all benefit from technological advances and thus deserve a steady income, especially as we enter into a world where AI might take away many of our jobs. Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries, has been warning about the perils of UBI in his articles and in a chapter in his book. He says giving money to everyone doesn't make sense economically, nor does it make sense theologically. People benefit from working and enjoy the fruits of their labor. Now, the National Bureau of Economic Research published a study that was summarized in a lengthy thread, and they found that giving people in Compton, California, at least $500 per month in free money did little to help them. The participants only ended up $100 richer and smoked more cigarettes. Here's a summary of some of the findings. For example, receiving guaranteed income had no impact on the labor supply of full-time workers, but part-time workers had a lower labor market participation by 13 percentage points. The researchers discerned there was no overall effect of indices of psychological or financial well-being. The results should not be surprising. Many studies show that happiness and fulfillment come from earned success. People who work hard and receive the benefit of their work are much happier and fulfilled than people who, for example, win the lottery. Proverbs 13:11 says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers it little by little will increase it." This recent study merely confirms what the Bible teaches and most of us know. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about this whole idea of the Ten Commandments, and that is our first article. We don't have an article here, but you can go to firstliberty.org or go to FLI. That stands for First Liberty Insider. That's something you should get every week just so you know what's going on. But there have been a number of changes because even though we're talking about putting up the Ten Commandments, this poor woman, Marisol Castro, has found herself in a situation in Connecticut, and I've lived in Connecticut, so I know it's quite the blue state, but nevertheless, just saying that she can't even have a crucifix in her workspace. And then didn't they say that, well, if she wants to have it, she can hide it under her desk? Kelly, give us some background here.
Yeah, she was forced to hang it under her desk.
Oh, my goodness.
She could not, I mean, first, just to understand the setting, all the teachers have this area behind them to put their personal things. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff behind the teacher's desk in this school. I mean, there's Yodas, there's you name it, right? It's perfectly okay to put the pride flag or whatever, but the one thing you can't put is a cross. And then they said, well, okay, we'll hang it under your desk. It's like, excuse me?
Take the arms off it?
Yeah. She's like, well, rather than be fired, maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. It didn't take more than 24 hours for her to go, I can't do that. Can't do that. This is literally hiding it under a bushel. Put it back up. And so now they've thrown her out of the position. And then they made it worse. Like it's not like one federal violation of the law is enough. So they then retaliated against her for filing her complaint. They have now moved her out of her teaching position,
so bad,
which she's been for 30 years, and put her in a back room. And then when she went on the media to talk about what was happening, they violated her rights by saying a bunch of lies. Number one, that allegedly were in her personnel files, and that's a violation of state law in Connecticut. So they're just trying to, viciously attack this poor woman who's done nothing but love kids for 30 years and serve them because she has a crucifix in her personal space. And it's not like the crucifix is like half of her space, right? It's like It's like one of a lot of things in interpersonal workspace. So this is an example of the kind of things happening to our teachers. These are not the types of teachers we want to get rid of. These are the type of teachers we'd like to have. They actually have beliefs and values and love the kids. And I mean, it's really sad what she's having to go through. The good news is not only is First Liberty representing her, but we have one of the largest law firms in the world has joined us. And they are none too pleased about what's going on either. So let's just say this school district will know they've been in a fight. And I think by the end, I feel very confident that Marisol will be restored, and that will maybe even have a precedent that makes clear to every other teacher. Like the Coach Kennedy case wasn't clear enough. The guy who went to a knee during his work after the game, that's okay. It's okay for government teachers, public school teachers, coaches to be religious. Yet, in our personal workspace, you can't have a cross. So I guess we'll have to do it for teachers to make it clear if you wouldn't understand the Supreme Court decision on Kennedy, which, of course, everybody should.
You know, some of that comes back to courage. You know, just a week ago, we had, of course, an individual you know very well, Keisha Russell. Title of her book is Uncommon Courage, and the courage of some of the individuals you defended in terms of religious liberty. I think I shared with you the other day, they have a film coming out called Live Not by Lies. Next week during our Truth Team, we're going to see if we can get Rod Dreyer here, who wrote the book. And again, it's just a reminder that sometimes it looks insignificant. What about a crucifix or 15 or 30 seconds praying on the 50-yard line? But it's the start of something that goes the wrong direction. And Rod Dreyer's been writing about this for decades now, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah. It's huge. I mean, it's a great book. It talks about, I mean, we're living through what he wrote, what is that, 5 years ago or whenever it was?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
I mean, what the point of his book, if you haven't read it, is all these other communist countries and what it took to bring back freedom. And it wasn't a violent revolution. It was what happens in these countries is with these totalitarian kind of, Marxist or whatever regimes is everybody's forced to go along with the lie. But if enough people, not a majority, just enough people will stand and speak the truth, even if it costs them, it collapses. It can't handle the truth. And so think of what we've just been through, right? With men and girl sports and all these things. Everybody was at first kind of like, well, I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to, step
I'm not
out.
a biologist. Yeah. I can't define what a woman is.
Now, but it took the Riley Gaines and when enough people started speaking up, then it became okay for other people to say the emperor has no clothes. And eventually it collapses. That's exactly what Live Not by Lies is. And we're seeing it in our own country, which is why it really requires, who are these people who would stand up for the truth, even if it costs them? Christians. I mean, there are others, but mainly Christians. And so if the Christians won't speak the truth, then who will? So it really is, a wake-up call to every believer to not avoid controversy. You're not veering into controversy, but if God puts you in that situation, you lovingly and respectively speak the truth, and you refuse, to cave. Because if you do, it's not only about you, it's about all the rest of the people in your society. But it's a great example. We just lived through this, right? It's now an 80% issue.
Yes.
It was not an 80% issue because people didn't know what they were supposed to say, right? But now people are like, okay, I'm done with this. I know what a male is. I know what a female is. Some of these people have issues and they need help, but we're not going to destroy what God created in Genesis. I made them male and female. And that has tremendous consequences, as we see not only in the sports, but in locker rooms and in abuse of women and the taking away of the things that they've earned their whole life. Anyway, but it's just a great example, I think, of exactly what Rod was talking about in his Live Not by Laws book.
So we may be hearing from him next week. Liberty, let me come to you because one of the articles we have here is from Veronique DeRuggi. She's been on the program with us before. Invest in education, not the Department of Education. And you've been watching this whole education issue, and I think there's been some hand-wringing, but it's amazing how many Americans are saying, you know what, maybe we don't need a national Department of Education. Better handled at the states.
Well, I really thought that the article made so many good points, particularly allowing more local control over schools so that they can be creative. They can meet the needs of their local students best. And so when has a one-size-fits-all solution from the national government worked for really anything? And I have very good friends who are public school teachers. And so I know that, and a lot of times they deserve better pay and they need resources for their classrooms. So I want to support teachers, but I also want them to have more control and more say over how they're able to educate the students in their classrooms. And so I think whenever you look at some of the numbers of where is all this money going, is it actually going to students or is it getting siphoned off somewhere and we don't know? It's not as if this is really, there are certain programs and everything which the article details, but I think we need more local control for the funds that are going to go into our public schools, and teachers need more freedom to serve their students in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think I saw something that Heritage put out not too long ago in the last few weeks. That was, I forget over the period of time, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, but it's gone from 35% of the money going to non-teacher in the classroom to now 70%. And if you wonder why, part of the reason is because when you have a federal bureaucracy, it requires all these things, and now you have to hire all these people that keep track of this and that and all of a sudden the money's not going to the teachers. It's going to other places. The middle management or whatever in the schools is where all the money's gone. And so what's sad is the lies you're hearing about, well, this means that they're going to take away the civil rights protection, and this means there's going to be no student loans. And, of course, all these articles point out those are just being housed under something different. But the idea of taking the bureaucracy out and allowing this to go to the states, it's a great idea. The other thing I've heard is, well, some states won't do it well. Well, this is, those
citizens need to speak up and vote for better policies.
That's right, and it'll improving what they're doing. So it's great all the way around. But again, you wouldn't know that if you were just reading the media.
We'll come back and talk a little bit more about it, but we'll open up the phones. Do you think we should abolish a Department of Education? 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Well, Truth Team Week is just about here, and we need your help. First of all, will you please pray for Point of View? Your prayers are the foundation for all that we do, and honestly, the reason for any success we have. Second, consider helping us get a head start on our Truth Team fundraising goal. Point of View can't bring a biblical perspective to the tough issues of our day without your support. And a biblical worldview is needed in this culture more than ever. Our goal for Truth Team Week, which begins on Monday, is to raise $150,000. But you can help us get a head start by giving now. Give today so we can kick off our Truth Team fundraiser in a historic way and bring biblical truth to this nation in need. Give online at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Liberty McArtor, as well as Kelly Shackelford, talking about the Department of Education. Latest polls show that I think a majority of Americans still are not sure that abolishing the Department of Education is a good idea. It's gone back and forth. Ronald Reagan ran on the idea of abolishing the Department of Education, but then Bill Bennett was the head of it, and we sort of liked it, and Gary Bauer is the Undersecretary of Education, and then you go all the way to George W. Bush, no child left behind, and some things like that, and now this push in that direction. But I want to get some phone calls as well as get some other comments, because certainly there are all sorts of issues about funding and what that might mean as well. So let's head first out to South Carolina. Gail, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
I live in a small town in South Carolina, and I ended up having to educate my last child in a private school, in a Christian school setting, because I knew how bad the schools were in this area. And just a few months ago, they hired a superintendent of the schools, and this lady was caught stealing, charging all kinds of stuff to her card as though it was her private card, and they had to buy her out $300,000. For what? We live in a county where we really can't afford that. But if we didn't have all the bureaucracy from Washington, this would not be an issue. She would not have gotten that kind of money if the states was in control of what her salary was.
Well, again, Kelly, part of it just the number of regulations. We were talking about just the number of individuals that are in administration, and that's at least 30 to 40% now, if you look at the numbers that have been proposed most recently. And so that requires, as you said, so much paperwork, so much shuffling of paper. We send money off to the Department of Education and the federal government, and then some of it eventually trickles back to the state. Wouldn't we be better at the state level, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, the idea of sending your money to Washington, D.C., like the people in Washington, D.C. know best for your education system. I mean, come on. This is why we have local school districts. This is why we have school boards who are accountable to the people who put them in office. That's where the authority should be, and that's where the accountability should be, because parents are going to insist. Not only parents are going to insist better education, but employers in the community are going to insist, because they need to be able to hire people who can actually do the job, right? Now, by the way, what we're talking about here is sort of fiscally, policy and all these things. Let me add to this. We haven't said this. This is totally unconstitutional, okay? The Constitution is a document of enumerated powers. The federal government only has the specific powers that are given to it. The founders did not want them to have power over everything. So they do have power over immigration and a number, the specific. Education is not in the Constitution. The founders would have been, terrorized by the idea that the federal government was going to be in control of education all over the country. That's like a first step towards, totalitarianism, right? So this is not constitutional. This is not what our Constitution says. And the 10th Amendment says if it's not in there, it's left to the states. This is a state issue. And that's what's trying to happen. Now, there are a lot of policy reasons why this is also good, but I do want to point out this is not our system. This is stuff that was put in. Wasn't it Carter? Who was it? I think it was Carter.
It was in 1980 as a payback. We talked about that the other day, the history of it.
And in it specifically says that, by the way, as we're doing this, the federal government will have no power over anything that's happening in the states. Now, I guess that's kind of gone away. So I just think there are policy reasons, there are economic reasons, but there's also a constitutional reason.
Mm-hmm. Some people might wonder, Liberty, okay, what happens to the civil rights issues? Well, those go into the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. The biggest amount of the money that goes to education are student loans. Now, Kelly and I probably have a philosophy that says, why don't we go back to where the banks provide the student loans? When I first went to school, school. I know that's when the Earth's crust was warm and the dinosaurs walked on this earth, but I got my student loan from a bank. But it was Barack Obama that said, oh, no, let's bring that all under the federal government. So even if we don't privatize it, there are other ways to address that. So anybody that thinks that somehow this is going to be the greatest disaster to strike American education, I think you could look at the concrete steps that people are talking about, some through the Heritage Foundation, of what can be done in the future.
Yeah, and those are valid questions to ask because we should, and obviously people do care about education in our nation. And I'm a beneficiary of homeschooling and I homeschool my kids, but I understand that's not practical for everybody. So we want a strong public education system. But I think a lot of this comes down to not addressing the root issue. So, for instance, student loans, I think they're always going to be there, and they allow people to go to college who might not otherwise be able to. But if everybody's needing to take out student loans, then shouldn't we address why college has also gotten so expensive and also isn't producing very good results either? So that's just another issue where we could address the root of that. And again, to look at just because it's the status quo, that doesn't mean it's the best. So we want to try to make education stronger for American children and American families. We want a well-educated society. That was, talk about the founders, that was necessary for our system of government and not a one-size-fits-all. So how can we make education stronger? How can we give people who have boots on the ground, so to speak, teaching these kids, how can we give them more power at the local level to make these consequential decisions? And those are the questions we need to be asking.
Yeah. And look, I think the first question you ask yourself when again, this is not the constitutional question. This is more the public policy question. Please name for me, outside of the military, what do you think the federal government does better than you could do locally in figuring out? This is kind of basic free market principles, but the centralized control is usually a really bad idea, because the people making the decisions for your community in Washington, D.C. don't live in your community. They don't know what you need and what's most important, what would have the greatest impact on education in your community. This is why we elect people locally. And so I don't know. Be thinking through whatever else that you have local that you think you should give over to the federal government to decide. People that you'll never see in some back office that are going to be making the decisions for your community. It's a bad idea. There's some times, like the military, where our government needs to have a military, and that's not a local, that's a national. But I just think that's a major concept as well, is just the efficiency, the effectiveness. The free market economy and sort of listening to local communities is much, much better than centralized control in Washington, D.C.
One of the things that we were going to be rolling out pretty soon is that we recognize that these executive orders only last so long. And this is going to be a little more significant if you abolish the Department of Education, or even just downsize it to the point where it's just keeping records but isn't issuing policies. And, of course, one of the things I've had a chance to look at from things that Liberty has been writing is we have our take action items. And the one on the moment is on abortion, but the next one I've already had a chance to read ahead on, which will be rolling out soon, is on DEI. And it's just amazing, Liberty, the number of DEI mandates that came from the Department of Education. When you have a more progressive president, he or someday she can just push all those down. Mm-hmm. And a lot of teachers that didn't want to implement those in their classrooms had to do so, or else they'd have to go out on the streets and find another job.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that we've seen more and more is the Department of Education just becoming another thing that whoever is in office can use to push their agenda and bypass the public in doing so. And then you go back and forth with, now we've got, another Dear Colleague letter, and this is going to be the standard in all of the schools now, and otherwise you're not going to get funding. And it's like, well, we shouldn't be yo-yoing back and forth. Again, they should be in charge at the local level. And the schools shouldn't be the playground for your political agenda, and especially when it's not at all related to how well they're performing academically. And so hopefully this law, if it passes, will address some of that. And then if there is no Department of Education or some of those issues are fixed, then maybe we won't see that abuse happening. Yeah. And, again, to completely abolish the Department of Education, since it was a congressional creation,
Congress will have to vote.
Congress has to do it. But that doesn't mean you can't move a number of these things to other areas. You could put the loans under the Small Business Administration, which is used to doing loans, not the Education Department. And so you could move a lot of things around, and then you could get rid of the stuff that's duplicative. And you could save money, a lot of taxpayer money. So you hope they can pass it through Congress, but if they can't, they're going to do what they can, looks like.
Good. Take a break, and we'll come back, take some more phone calls. Next hour, we'll be certainly getting into the issue of lawfare and the Tesla terrorists and a lot of other issues we haven't covered yet. We'll be back right after this.
One of the United Nations' largest annual feminist gatherings, the Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, is meeting in New York. Rebecca Oas from the Center for Family and Human Rights says this year there's a dramatic mood shift, largely because of the change in U.S. leadership. A declaration adopted on the first day of the two-week conference contains some language friendly to the gender identity agenda, but to the chagrin of representatives from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, references to sexual and reproductive health, reproductive rights, and sexuality education were left out. Feminists are not happy. Dr. Oas says normally they ignore conservatives at the CSW, but not this time. At a town hall for CSW attendees, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of a ferocious backlash against the rights of women and girls, growing in power and strength. He opened with a warning. The poison of patriarchy is back, with a vengeance. A change in the White House normally brings a switch in how the U.S. seeks to influence international abortion policy. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio rejoined the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which states that there is no international right to abortion and that no nation is obligated to fund or promote abortion. UN agencies constantly work to implement a version of gender equality that is outside their mandate. They are supported by certain NGOs and by groups like Women Deliver, which has voiced its concern that conservatives now hold power in key global capitals. Dr. Oas says the presence of conservative groups at the UN is often derided, and their messages have been increasingly denigrated as anti-rights, including by UN officials. Conservatives are pushing back with a statement declaring that in many countries, majorities or sizable minorities of women hold pro-life and pro-family views, which are mainstream positions and not anti-rights. It's their views that should drive UN policy.
For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Dennis, listening on WAGP. You're on with Liberty McArtor and Kelly Shackelford.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm not really good about talking about this stuff. I've been thinking about it for 45, 50 years, but I don't talk very much to a lot of people. But I believe that all the discussion I've been hearing is peripheral, that the real foundational discussion that needs to be had is what happened to us over the last 100 years, since John Dewey and Horace Mann had such an effect on our education system. We're humanists. We're not the Christian nation that we began with. Kids used to have an education that at age 13 they were able to run a business. They knew what right and wrong was. They had no question about what the truth was, because that was the point of the education. And when John Dewey partnered with Rockefeller, they wanted to create good workers, not good citizens. And the same thing with Horace Mann. He brought some ideas over from Europe that were very secular, and we've lost our vocabulary. You say "God bless you" to somebody, and they look at you funny. Years ago, when this country started, that was a common thing to say, or a common idea that everybody shared, and that's what we need to get back to. We can go back to humanists' ways of doing our education system, and we're humanists who were taught by humanists who were taught by humanists. We need to break out of that mold.
Sure.
We need to break back into being a Christian nation.
Well said.
Yeah.
And for a guy that doesn't speak very often, that was very good, by the way,
well
I might
said.
say. Let me just mention that some people are saying he's mentioning some names I've never heard before. A couple of books I'd highly recommend. One by Marlon Maddox, who is the original founder of Point of View, Public Education Against America. And then this one by Pete Hegseth, Battle for the Christian Mind. Two very good books that remind us it was John Dewey, it was Horace Mann, it was actually the Humanist Association of America, the Humanist Manifesto 1, then later Humanist Manifesto 2, and we have basically a very secular humanistic educational system today in America, don't we?
Yes, and even Christians, a lot of times in Christian schools, adopt the same model or basic understanding of the purpose of education. So I'm really glad Dennis brought this up. But he's right. We did kind of shift to just a very pragmatic view of education. We need to create workers for factories. And so
that's where it came from.
And even today, when you look at a lot of the classes that students have to take, even when they go to college, it is very narrow because it is seen as you only need this set of skills. And there is a level of practicality to education, but we've lost sight of educating the whole person to be able to be a lifelong learner. And that's why even young adults and adolescents who were classically educated years ago, they were still able to do a wide variety of things because they had the tools to always be learning, to use their whole person, to use their body and their mind and their spirit. And so another book I would add to that list, Kerby, is The Vanishing American Adult by former Senator Ben Sasse. He also kind of talks about that transition and how it affects young adults today, but definitely worth reading up on what is education for.
Yeah, and I'm going to go real macro here. If you look at where things are going now, I don't know what God's doing. I don't know where this is going to end up. But if you're paying attention, and this really all is sort of the religious liberty arena is what's causing it. Although before that, there were a lot of sort of almost libertarian and other groups pushing for like school choice and all this. But if you're watching what's going on, there's a Supreme Court case right now over a charter school in Oklahoma.
That's right.
And the question is, can you have a charter school that's Christian? And, this is sort of blowing up the system a little bit. And you look at that, you look at school choice breaking out in all these different places, and then our Supreme Court victory that says, well, when you have school choice, you can't exclude the Christian schools. And 85% of the choices in private education are Christian schools. I mean, we're moving towards something where, we might create. I mean, it depends on what the court says, right? But we're definitely changing what we've been doing, and the reality is, monopolies have never been good, and government monopolies are the worst of all. And that's and people realize it. They know it, right? And it's not Democrat or Republican, right? I mean, I think the highest when they did the Texas, which is in a battle over school choice right now, the highest group in favor of school choice were African Americans.
By percentage, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is an issue that's coming. It's happening right in front of your eyes. Where it's going to lead, I don't know, but it definitely is going to disrupt or change our whole education system. And it's just something it's an opportunity for people who want to have impact. But I do think we need to recognize when something is happening around us in history that is different. And so something is changing, and be watching that Supreme. I think it was Saint Isidore is the name of that case, but it's being argued, and that decision will be down by late June, and it's not going to finalize everything. But if you add that to the school choice victories, to the Christian schools and school choice, and then you add this, now you're going to have a really big. You're going to have a difference. If kids can choose a charter school that's Christian in all elements, think of what that means. I mean, what we're sort of going back to is, why don't you just let the parents have the money and they can choose whatever school they want for their kids? And including, like the caller was just talking about, ones that are teaching faith and teaching, morals and teaching all the other things that the public schools, have much more difficulty teaching because it's not really their main agenda. This is a big change that's going on, and it could go in pretty dramatic directions.
Mm-hmm. And even just a few months ago, I read a really detailed article in The Atlantic on kind of this renaissance of classical schools in Christian context and even non-Christian context, because I think you are seeing people who they see that the education system as it is isn't working, and they're looking for something different. And it was very interesting because some of these schools are in places like New York, and they're serving kind of typically underserved or underprivileged students, and the results they have are just amazing because they're going back to this really ancient and Christian-based approach to education. And so, yes, I think we're seeing a renaissance happening, a change, and it's exciting.
Well, again, Dennis, you started the conversation, but we also have quite a number of other calls, but we have to go to a break, but we will come back. Maybe we'll take some of those, and if we don't get to everything today, well, we can always cover that next week. Let me just mention next week is, of course, when we're going to be having our Truth Team, and if you haven't gone to the website already, you'll see that there's a banner there that says Anchored to Truth, but also you might want to check your inbox because we have some emails going out, and we're hoping to get off with a great start, and quite frankly, we can't do it without you. So I'm looking forward to next week, some of the conversation we're going to have, and I think you will appreciate some of the guests that we're going to have as well. And Liberty, I guess we have you on Wednesday, so that's going to be a good opportunity.
Yep.
And we'll probably even talk about your upcoming booklet that has just been written but has not been mailed yet on the abortion pill. So we'll get into some of that and educate people about this. But a couple of you want to talk about education, we'll do that, and hopefully we'll be able to get into a couple of other issues because this has been a busy news week, but I appreciate all of you calling, joining with us. Most importantly, go to the website to find some of the articles we've posted, and we'll be back right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We have a couple of calls left over from last hour. Let me just give you an overview, because we do have an article which I do commend to you. Why are they so angry? Alan Joseph Bauer actually explains some of that. You get this white hot anger, whether it's towards Elon Musk and burning down some of these electric charging stations and defacing Tesla cars and trucks and everything. But before that, it had to do with Israel and Hamas and a number of others. I think he's done a very good job of explaining that some of that goes back to this division in society, which we've talked about before. Kelly and I've talked about the elites versus the rest, and goes in and talks about everybody from John Kerry to Barack Obama to Tony Fauci to Tony Blinken and on and on. So that we may or may not get to. We do have a piece here on Trump may have to save the Constitution from the courts, and another piece of Trump and Roberts are both wrong. So we'll get to those in just a minute. But let's take some phone calls, because the whole issue of education has surfaced some calls, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. So, Carol, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you for having me. And I taught, this goes back quite a few years, I used to teach occupational education for high school students and sometimes adults. So that goes back quite a ways for me in '85. And I had a coordinator that was not a believer, and I was shocked when I found out that he was almost forcing me to use the budget money, because he said, no, you have to order for next year, because even if you're saying you don't need anything,
oh yes,
we're not going to get any more money.
Here we go.
And that'll cut out the money. So just take it home and use it. And the other girl was taking it home, and I thought, what is this? If I don't need money, I don't need it. I don't need a lot to teach well. And then the next summer, I was the same boss. I had taken off. I wanted to go sightseeing to Washington, D.C., and I brought him back a copy of the Constitution. I thought he'd be thrilled to put it in his office, and he said, no, I'm not interested in something like that. I was just shocked.
And I think this was in California, right, when this was happening?
Yes, it was.
It sounds like
California.
the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, doesn't it, Kelly? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I first thought I had when they said you got to spend your money is like ice cream for all the kids, you know. But it's exactly, we've heard this story a lot, which is why, well, you know, which is why the idea of toning down our federal government is a great idea, because it's exactly what happens in every single agency. If you don't spend your money, you're not going to do it. Now, how the new administration, what was it that they demanded they look through and see if they could cut? Is some significant percentage, 25% or whatever. That's a totally different approach.
Sure. Let me take one more call here. We'll go to another Carol, KYCC in California. Carol, what would you add to our conversation today?
Hi, Kerby. Thank you for having me on your show. I would like to add, it just doesn't make any sense for us to continue to have a Department of Education when the scores of the students have done nothing but drop over the years since it was taken away from the states. To me, it's just common sense that's just not working. We got to get rid of it. And in the meantime, of course, the government, has squandered billions of taxpayer dollars that could have been so much better spent.
Yes.
It's way too reasonable. The idea that you don't get more money if you don't show results, that means you're not allowed to work in government, I think. That's, but you're exactly right. I mean, we ought to, how about incentives even? How about put incentives in there? We will look for some more tax money if you can actually improve but the incentives probably would need to go towards individual teachers. Right. See if they see, that's the way life works. This is the whole point to school choice, by the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's competition and goals, and those things really work. That's why every business has them. But it's a great point. We've just more and more and more of this federal money for education, when they shouldn't be controlling education, and there's no results. There's no increase. It's clear. And then the unions, which are the big people behind this, the teachers' unions, they all, were horrible to all the students during COVID. It wasn't about the kids during COVID; it was about the unions, and so that's why they're screaming about all this. So, I think return things to the states. Let's get all the in-between people out. Let's have the parents and the local school districts and the teachers. And let's look at what percentage of the money is actually going to teaching and what's going to bureaucrats. And I think you could solve a lot of problems with this.
Exactly. Carol made great points that we have seen a lot of corruption in this agency. And if you're not seeing results, then why are you going to keep doing the same thing over and over again? Something needs to change.
Doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results, and we know what that leads to. Mm-hmm. Let's go around the round table real quickly, because I think both of you probably have some thoughts about this, but just the idea of destroying Tesla cars and ruining the lives of individuals that make the cars, that have them in the showrooms and everything else, and then destroying even the way in which you can electrically charge those cars. It's not going to hurt Elon Musk. He's a billionaire, but it's going to hurt all the other people, isn't it?
Yeah, I really appreciate what Attorney General Bondi did by, number one, speaking out and designating it appropriately as what it is. It's domestic terrorism. And again, like you say, it's not, Elon Musk has what, $500 billion? It's not going to hurt him, but you're shooting bullets into dealerships. And if you are causing damage to Tesla, which, Tim Walsh was bragging about how their stock went down. Again, it's not going to make any difference as far as, affecting Musk, but it's the most American. It's one of the only places where an automobile dealer that's all American. It's American workers, American families, and it's ridiculous what they're doing. And I wonder. I do hope one of the things I know the Justice Department is doing is investigating where the money's coming from, and the fact of how much of this is coordinated is like for instance, a George Soros type thing. I hope they find out because that would be significant, and that would be, I think, significant criminal activity. It'd be a criminal conspiracy and really connected to terrorism. But I appreciated even her saying that, which will discourage people who aren't a part of the criminal conspiracy to go, maybe I don't want 20 years in jail.
Yes.
So I don't think I'm going to go do that. So praise the Lord. There's actually law and order and not sort of a different system. We don't care whether they're attacking a conservative or a liberal. It's wrong. This kind of terroristic activity is wrong.
Let's take a break and we'll come back. The Constitution, the courts, deportation. We have a lot to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
For decades, progressive professors and politicians have been promoting universal basic income, known as UBI. It is a fiscal program to pay a regular income to everyone without conditions. Proponents argue that we all benefit from technological advances and thus deserve a steady income, especially as we enter into a world where AI might take away many of our jobs. Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries, has been warning about the perils of UBI in his articles and in a chapter in his book. He says giving money to everyone doesn't make sense economically, nor does it make sense theologically. People benefit from working and enjoy the fruits of their labor. Now, the National Bureau of Economic Research published a study that was summarized in a lengthy thread, and they found that giving people in Compton, California, at least $500 per month in free money did little to help them. The participants only ended up $100 richer and smoked more cigarettes. Here's a summary of some of the findings. For example, receiving guaranteed income had no impact on the labor supply of full-time workers, but part-time workers had a lower labor market participation by 13 percentage points. The researchers discerned there was no overall effect of indices of psychological or financial well-being. The results should not be surprising. Many studies show that happiness and fulfillment come from earned success. People who work hard and receive the benefit of their work are much happier and fulfilled than people who, for example, win the lottery. Proverbs 13:11 says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers it little by little will increase it." This recent study merely confirms what the Bible teaches and most of us know. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, try to pull all this together. In some respects, we have the two Ds. We have Doge and all the questions about corruption and that issue. Then we have the deportation. And in some respects, these are different spokes which all go to a hub, and that's the courts. And as I shared just the other day, both Liberty and Kelly, if you look in the first term for Donald Trump, there were 64 judicial injunctions. To put that in perspective, over 8 years, Barack Obama had 12. As a matter of fact, as of Monday, and now there have been more since then, there were at that time just 15 nationwide injunctions during the last month of February, and that's more than Barack Obama had over 8 years. He had 12. So obviously, there are questions, and I see some people saying the president in some of his actions have violated a court order. Some say that what Elon Musk is doing is not part of the Constitution. I have other people that are saying, no, this is right within the purview of the president. And I think, Kelly, some of this is just going to have to go to the Supreme Court. Not that that should be the final arbiter, but you have so many different opinions right now about what's taking place. I don't see how you even come close to resolving some of that.
Yeah, there's so many issues we could talk about here. A number of weeks ago when I was on, I laid out some of the issues that are going to end up at the Supreme Court. I mean, Humphrey's executor, and there's a lot of, there are some precedents that most conservatives think are absolutely wrong under the Constitution. Mm-hmm. That, I mean, this is one of those things where I think these left wing, activists are going to maybe really regret what they're doing. because they're throwing all these lawsuits and they're providing an opportunity to really change some decisions. And really, ultimately, that's about executive power. I mean, if you look in Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that all the executive power is vested in the president, all of it. I mean, not part of it. There's no other person mentioned under Article 2 but the president of the United States. So this idea from some of these past opinions that some of these agencies are really kind of dual agencies in the executive branch because they have some legislative things that they do, and therefore the president can't hire and fire them just at will. Well, if it's the executive branch, he has all authority. He can fire whoever he wants. That's what they're probably going to end up with when they're through with this. So and I could go into others, but the point is there's this battle over what the Constitution really says, whether some of these past opinions are wrong, and I think they're teeing that up. I think the other really big issue that is going to have to be dealt with is this idea of a local judge issuing a nationwide injunction.
That's the question I want to get to.
And I think this is untenable. I think that it's only becoming more noticeable because more liberal judges are using it in a dramatic fashion. And so they're going to force the Supreme Court to deal something. Now, I think one way to deal with it is really a judge only has authority over the people within their case and their area. So they really can't be issuing things outside of that. That would be one way maybe to limit it. I think if the Supreme Court doesn't take care of it, and I think Chief Justice Roberts understands this, that the legislature will do something.
Right. I want to get to that in just a minute.
But I think that the court will take care of this, and I think that a lot of these decisions are wrong that are being handed down. And again, Trump's problem is Trump doesn't wait. He's not very patient. So instead, he starts attacking these judges and then
calling for their impeachment, which he shouldn't have said.
And then Roberts responds by, if you read his statement, he's really saying, let this go through the appellate process. These yahoos at the district court are going to be overturned. And then he states what normally is the position of the Supreme Court, which is no judge should be impeached for a decision. I don't totally agree with that, but that is traditionally what Rehnquist and others said. I think if it's if you're flaunting or if you're refusing to follow your duty or whatever, but just because you disagree with a judge's opinion is not. But I also thought it was wrong for Roberts to issue a statement. Impeachment is about the legislative process. And if the judiciary is going to be independent, which they should be, they don't need to be speaking into political issues. They don't need to be talking about the legislative process. They need to speak in their opinions. So I thought that was a rare error by the Chief Justice to talk about that. But I do think let this work its way through the courts. Let this get to the Supreme Court. I don't think they're going to go with some of the shenanigans that are going on. But it is a shame that you can cause all this kind of disruption because one judge is trying to be the king. That judge was never elected. They were there for one area, for the clients that are before them, not to control the entire country. And something has to be done to remedy the abuse that's going on by a number of these district court judges.
And the fact is there are quite a number of those because you have one that says you can't take this Georgetown student. Another one say you've got to turn around the plane and bring it back. Another one questioning the legitimacy of impounding funds and Doge. And you mentioned just in passing, if we had Senator Josh Hawley on here, but I think we can represent his view very well, the courts were established by Congress.
Yes, all of them but the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Constitution established the Supreme Court, but the others were. So there's a possibility of limiting what's called appellate jurisdiction. And so he said either the Supreme Court needs to intervene and make clear that there's only one court that can issue rules for the whole country, that's the Supreme Court, or else Congress needs to legislate and make clear that district courts do not have the ability to issue these kinds of injunctions. And people have pointed out, sometimes times. I'm even thinking of the abortion issue. Remember, one of the decisions that came out of West Texas was on this issue of the abortion pill. But in most cases, it isn't conservative justices appointed by Donald Trump or in the past by George W. Bush that are doing all this. It's the 71% of all the justices that were appointed 12 of the last 16 years by either Barack Obama or certainly Joe Biden, right?
Yeah. So, this conversation, one, makes me grateful for our system of government and the balance of powers that we have, because even the fact that it's so complicated and confusing, and you have kind of these battling opinions and interpretations of the Constitution shows that we don't just have one person who's in power and can do whatever they want. But, I do think it is confusing. And that's why, I'm really learning a lot listening to you, Kelly, and Kerby, highlighting these things, because I think a lot of Americans and conservatives are concerned about the things they're hearing because they don't want to see an abuse of power. And they say, well, is that really unconstitutional? Like, is that an abuse of executive power and authority, or is this judge right, or is this just politics? And so it's hard to find kind of somebody who will just say, here's what the Constitution says, or what we think it says, and how it should be interpreted. And so, I think a lot of people are feeling that tension right now.
And I think that, Chief Justice Roberts is right. It will be decided on appeal. This will be cleaned up. But I think part of the problem is there's 6 so-called conservatives on the Supreme Court, but there are only 3 or 4 who will. There's 2 who like to avoid ruling until the last minute.
We've seen that before.
And this is what they did on the Doge stuff. It got up there, and the dissenters are like, this is insane. We have a judge in one district determining executive power for the whole country. We need to deal with this. And whereas Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett and the liberals were like, no, we'll just let this be, and we'll get to this later. It's not time yet. And I think that they need to look at themselves and go, a lot of what you're watching is because you wouldn't take care of your business. Part of the point of judges is to provide clarity, to provide consistency, so that people know what the law is. And when they delay like this, this is the kind of thing that happens. And so I would put part of the blame at the feet of the more, quote, moderate conservatives who like to push these rulings off. You had Alito write that, very excellent dissent. And I think that's part of why I do think this will be cleaned up. But in the meantime, the president can't do his job.
Right. And
so it either needs to be expedited very quickly, or they should deal with this right in these emergency motions at the beginning, and then eventually clear it up with some big opinion in a big case.
Maybe have Congress jump into it because, just as Neil Gorsuch says, if you guys would do your job, we wouldn't have to do the job you tossed to us. So that's another question. But we need to take a break. There's some other issues. Can we impound funds? Can we actually abolish departments? A lot of big issues. We'll talk about that right after this.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford, Liberty McArtor with us. And one of the articles we have here is by Stephen Presser, and he is an individual that is actually teaching law. But in the second page, when we talk about this issue of Doge, he reminds us of the fact that the Congress back in 1974, I'm going to give you a little history here. Remember Howard Phillips used to be on this program many times, and Howard Phillips had been in the Nixon administration and said, you know, all this money going to some of these groups. At that time, I think it was Legal Service Administration. Today it was USAID. Well, we shouldn't be spending that money, and they're wasting it, so we will just impound those funds. Well, at a time when Richard Nixon was had this major cloud over his head known as Watergate, they were able to pass that and thus say that even if the Congress approves the money and the agency is wasting the money, the president, who's supposedly the executor of the executive branch, cannot impound those funds. Kelly, I predict that is eventually going to make its way to the Supreme Court, don't you think?
No doubt. They're challenging all this. So they're teeing up that issue. As I said, they're teeing up a number of these issues that there are decisions which very easily, now that you have a different court, a court that actually are originalists and are going to look, well, what does the Constitution say? Yeah. Unlike and people don't understand this, but for 80 years we have a court, that wasn't their approach.
Right.
Their approach was, this is a living, breathing Constitution. We need to read into it for today. And they just kind of went with their gut, of what they wanted. And that's no longer what we have. Now, you might disagree with what they say is the original meaning of the text, but you have 6 justices who really think that's their job.
Right.
So now you're going to tee up impoundment.
Oh, boy.
You're going to tee up executive power and like Humphrey's executor and some of these major opinions. I think they're going to regret what they're doing because they're going to create the opposite effect. I understand when the Congress, the Congress under Article 1 is the one who has power over the purse strings. So they are the ones to decide whether they are going to approve money and say this money needs to be spent on this. I don't think the president can say, I'm not going to spend it on that. But usually that's not what they do. They just send money without any all the specifics. And in those things, it seems like the president has power under the executive branch. So I think all these things are gonna be decided because they're throwing all these lawsuits, and they might feel really good about some of these more liberal judges who are issuing injunctions at the beginning. But as somebody who does litigation, we look at the beginning. But we look ultimately at where is this going to end? Yeah,
appeals court and the Supreme Court.
That's right.
And
that's going
to be very different.
These big issues are going to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
and they got a different court now, and I think these are going to be major decisions that are. Again, I do like that they're going to take us back to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? And if you don't like the Constitution, then you need to change the Constitution, but not have judges change the Constitution.
Yeah. And you think about this liberty, here's a good example. Most governors, Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Texas, they have what's called a line item veto. Yep. Well, during this time, they said, no, the president can't even have a line item veto. So we give more power to the governors than we do to the president of the United States, all because of these decisions that go back in 1974, which Congress was able to kind of push through because Richard Nixon was pretty weak at the time because of the Watergate scandal and eventually stepped down. And I think it's about time to fix some of that. So that's DOGE. Want to get into the other one, the whole idea of deportation. But again, I think a lot of the anger, and we talked about this earlier, is misplaced. If you're angry about Elon Musk finding waste and fraud, maybe you should be angry really at the people that allowed all that waste and fraud to exist. If you're upset right now about some of the deportations taking place that maybe haven't been vetted accurately or sufficiently for you, maybe you should be more upset about the people that allowed these people to come in when they weren't vetted at all. And I think that's kind of the issue. But right now, there's an attempt to try to derail Donald Trump. I think this has the boomerang possibility that it will come back and provide even more strength, if not for Donald Trump, maybe the next president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate kind of bringing it back to this constitutional framework because, again, like Kelly has said, you don't have to agree with everything, but what does the Constitution say? How is our government supposed to be functioning? What is our president supposed to be able to do or not to do? And then to Kerby's point, so many of these things have not been happening in the right way for a very long time, and it's created a mess for everybody, and that's why we're here. But, first, people are wondering, what are some of these boomerang effects or end results that could happen that we might, some people might not like if they follow through on some of these legal issues, like the impoundment, for example.
Yeah, and like civil service laws. Okay, so the unions have pushed through all these laws that make it impossible to fire many federal employees, even if they're doing a horrible job.
Mm-hmm.
You have to document and go through this long series. And again, obviously Trump hadn't been following that, okay? They've been firing people. It's gonna tee up the issue. Wait, the Congress can't pass something, or you can't pass any law that changes the Constitution. And the president is the one given power to hire and fire within the executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could literally, I'm not saying what it's going to do, but it could just completely declare these civil service laws unconstitutional.
Unbelievable.
And
I don't think
so,
they see this coming.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about, in that I don't know if they're really thinking this through and where this could end up. And part of it is, and we talk about this, even people that we like who are with us on the issues, sometimes you watch out for your friends, because they can file lawsuits. You go, no, don't file that lawsuit. Do not file that lawsuit. And meanwhile, they're going off the cliff and they're carrying you with it, because they're going to create a precedent that's going to be used. And I think that's what's happening to the more extreme left and the unions and all that, the government unions, who want to be able to not have any of their persons fired for any reason. But they're filing these lawsuits, and they're going to tee this issue up, and we've got a different court, and it could definitely be something they regret doing.
Let me get your thoughts just for a few minutes, because we talked about DOJ. What about deportation? I, on the one hand, recognize that, as we read the other day, Marco Rubio, who is now the Secretary of State, said, look, if I knew when we gave you a visa that you were going to do this, this, and this, and this, I would not have given you a visa. Now you've done this, this, and this. I want to actually revoke your visa. If you are not a citizen of the United States, you still are subject to the laws of this country. You still have certain rights. But if you're here under a visa or a permit, I think it's a different legal status, is it not?
Well, sure. I mean, there's number one, there is a specific law on this. Okay? I mean, it was passed. It's not like Trump just doing it. It specifically gives the Secretary of State the ability to do this, because this area of foreign policy is an area where the courts have very little authority, in fact, almost none, against the president. The president is given the authority over foreign policy. So if they see somebody who is here, and this is Congress passed this, right, who is here on a visa, and they are doing things against the foreign policy of our country, and the Secretary of State documents these things, which he did, then you're gone. And again, it's not an area where the court has much discretion. The court really cannot do much about this. The discretion is given all to the Secretary of State. Now, you might have some activist judge here, I don't know, we'll see, who tries to insert their authority over something they have no authority over. But that's what the law says. The other one, with the deportation of all these gang members.
Yeah, with Judge Borisberg.
Yeah. First, these people don't have visas, okay? They're here illegally. They have nothing. And we already have a federal law that's been in place for a long time. In fact, it was passed by the people who founded this contemporaries of the people who founded this country. So they probably understand kind of what our country was about. And they specifically said, if you're here in a war or in an invasion or in a predatory, predatory incursion, in other words, you come in and you're not welcome, then the president, in protecting our country and as commander-in-chief, can just send them away. I mean, there's been a Supreme Court case over this. Supreme Court says the courts have no jurisdiction over this. This is the president's jurisdiction. And yet, this is the judge who issued the injunction. So this law is pretty solid. It's been around for a long time. It's been used in some bad ways, I'll tell you that. But in this case, it looks like, from everything I can see, that's going to be hard because there's a Supreme Court decision on it.
It's called the Alien Enemies Act.
Yep.
And he has now required the Trump administration to provide all sorts of information. So we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
One of the United Nations' largest annual feminist gatherings, the Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, is meeting in New York. Rebecca Oas from the Center for Family and Human Rights says this year there's a dramatic mood shift, largely because of the change in U.S. leadership. A declaration adopted on the first day of the two-week conference contains some language friendly to the gender identity agenda, but to the chagrin of representatives from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, references to sexual and reproductive health, reproductive rights, and sexuality education were left out. Feminists are not happy. Dr. Oas says normally they ignore conservatives at the CSW, but not this time. At a town hall for CSW attendees, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of a ferocious backlash against the rights of women and girls, growing in power and strength. He opened with a warning. The poison of patriarchy is back, with a vengeance. A change in the White House normally brings a switch in how the U.S. seeks to influence international abortion policy. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio rejoined the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which states that there is no international right to abortion and that no nation is obligated to fund or promote abortion. UN agencies constantly work to implement a version of gender equality that is outside their mandate. They are supported by certain NGOs and by groups like Women Deliver, which has voiced its concern that conservatives now hold power in key global capitals. Dr. Oas says the presence of conservative groups at the UN is often derided, and their messages have been increasingly denigrated as anti-rights, including by UN officials. Conservatives are pushing back with a statement declaring that in many countries, majorities or sizable minorities of women hold pro-life and pro-family views, which are mainstream positions and not anti-rights. It's their views that should drive UN policy.
For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention this is always a time when we talk about Penna Dexter's commentary. This one is U.S. at the UN, talking about the Commission on the Status of Women. You can read that. And some people oftentimes about now start saying, where's Penna Dexter? Well, she's going to be sitting right there on Monday when we do our Truth Team. So it's been a while since any of us have seen her, and we'll be getting a chance to hear from her. But you can find her commentary there. I'll also mention the last article I've posted here. It's by Jimmy Quinn. On Wednesday this last week, just a few days ago, I did a deep dive on China, and a lot of that was based on Tom Cotton's book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, except he was willing to say the 7 things you can't say about China, and we did as well. We went through all 7 of those, talked about a couple of others, and what was so interesting is Jimmy Quinn, said this may be the most important book on China during this decade of the 2020s, and I would agree, although I certainly used another book, and that was Plan Red, also a book that we talked about. And if you did not hear that, we went into it in some detail on Wednesday. It also is the issue of the March issue of Outlook, which is another reason why I think it would be really good for you to join with us during Truth Team next week. You receive the Outlook magazine on a regular basis, and I'm just looking at Liberty's particular piece coming out here on the abortion pill, and that's something we send out to those of you who join at $30 a month, $1 a day, $30 a month, and that is a booklet that we send out there as well. So those are some materials on the website. But Kelly, I want to come back for just a minute. The enemy alien law. There's a question that some people have had. Why would you want to go to the mat or die on the hill of an individual who has supported Hamas? It seems to me that if I really wanted to challenge the Trump administration and deportation, I'd want to find some really sympathetic couple that was being deported, and yet the battle right now is over individuals that aren't exactly the most likable people in the country.
No, it's they've picked the two worst examples I can think of. They've got the case with the student protester leader who engaged in criminal activity by taking over buildings, who is a Hamas person and handed out Hamas literature. Hamas, who beheaded children, all this horrible stuff. So and who's here on a visa, meaning we said, okay, you can come here to study. And so that's their number one. And then the other, if they couldn't get worse, is a gang of the most violent people in the United States from another country. I mean, we've all heard of MS-13 and how horrible they are. Tren de la Aragua is worse. It's the worst of all. And unlike the other case, they don't have visas, okay? They didn't come here with any piece of paper. They came here illegally to do illegal things, and they've attacked our citizens. They've raped. They've killed. I mean, and I can't imagine two worse cases to pick as your first case to try to lessen the executive power of the president. It's almost like they're doing Trump a favor. They're helping him. Hey, the ACLU is now helping Trump. There need to be a headline that the ACLU is now trying to help Donald Trump, because that sure looks like where this is going.
Well, again, the judge is saying that as the Trump administration's response is woefully insufficient, and he's now demanding the President of the United States come to him, and he's in the D.C. circuit. So, again, that I guess you could consider to be a little broader than just a local federal judge, but it's back to this whole idea, can one judge decide what the President of the United States can do? And that's been a question that has surfaced for some time, because sometimes there was a judge that wanted to challenge something that Joe Biden did. Now you have a judge wanting to challenge what Donald Trump is doing. What about that?
Well, I mean, it's one thing to challenge, judges typically are in a jurisdiction.
Yes.
So, typically, you can't tell the president because of some case in Washington, D.C., what he can do in Nebraska and in California. And and this is the problem, is these nationwide injunctions.
Right.
But in this case, they haven't even gone that far. There's not even necessarily even a basis for what the judge is doing. He's just saying, hey, I need time to make a decision, so I need to stop all these planes from carrying these people. The problem is they were already in air. And now the judge is asking for questions. And again, he's getting into to foreign policy and commander in chief. And think of if a judge said, "Oh, I see you're doing this battle overseas. I'm enjoining you from doing the battle." What is the commander in chief supposed to say? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing what the commander in chief would say is, "Get lost. You have no authority here. I'm the commander in chief." And that's where he's going with the information he's trying to ask. And so that's why you have a back and forth now on the injunction, because the administration is saying, wait, we can't be giving you information about internal, commander-in-chief activity. I don't know if that's real, but that's what they're arguing. and he's trying to get information to find out if he feels like his order wasn't obeyed.
Because then he violates a court order,
yes.
and then Trump could be impeached over that, couldn't he?
The problem, though, is he issued some things he stated, but that's not an order. His order was in writing, and from what we're hearing, I don't know, when his order came in writing, it wasn't violated. And Trump has been very specific in the last few days. You would think he would defy a court order. He was very specific that he will not and has not violated court orders, and he won't. But he said Roberts needs to clean. The Supreme Court needs to clean this up. So we'll see what happens. I think it's by Tuesday. I don't know what information the judge wants, but the real problem is he said some things in the hearing that were not in his order. And his order is what is the law, what his injunction is.
Yeah. So, again, if you're listening to people saying, well, the president has violated a court order, well, we'll figure that out sooner or later. Mm-hmm. But you're bringing out some things that you probably only would hear on Point of View. So, again, just one of the reasons why Liberty, I sometimes say, if you aren't listening to Point of View, you're probably going to be missing some things, because I have watched a lot of different programs and read a lot of different articles. And after a while, I don't even know who to believe. So it's kind of intriguing to see how this could be a little bit more complex than what maybe is presented right now on CNN or MSNBC, or even on the other side on Fox News or with the Associated Press. So we'll figure these out over time. But I do think you've heard something here that maybe you need to pay attention to. It is quite possible that some of these groups, these liberal groups, are trying to find a liberal judge to do their bidding. In the long run, it may actually be able to reinvigorate and maybe even strengthen the executive branch in ways that we haven't had in a long, long time.
No. They could be doing the very opposite of what they're trying to accomplish. I'm sure there'll be some different opinions, even if the Supreme Court rules. Some of these things I predict will be overturned. Some might not. But I think at the end of the day, the move will be towards more authority in the executive to do their job, which is not, I think, what these people want in their lawsuits.
Yeah. There's a book years ago talked about strengthen the executive. Maybe we're going to see strengthen the executive again. Well, you heard it right here at Point of View, and we did our best to cover all of the articles on the table. But I hope you'll join us next week. It's Truth Team, and we're going to be hearing from a number of different guests, and I think you will really appreciate that. You can go to the website, pointofview.net, find these articles, especially the ones at First Liberty and the idea of 10 Commandments in the classroom and RFIA, right? RFIA.org, as well as firstliberty.org. Don't forget, of course, Know Why Podcast. And most importantly, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Enjoy March Madness. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Well, Truth Team Week is just about here, and we need your help. First of all, will you please pray for Point of View? Your prayers are the foundation for all that we do, and honestly, the reason for any success we have. Second, consider helping us get a head start on our Truth Team fundraising goal. Point of View can't bring a biblical perspective to the tough issues of our day without your support. And a biblical worldview is needed in this culture more than ever. Our goal for Truth Team Week, which begins on Monday, is to raise $150,000. But you can help us get a head start by giving now. Give today so we can kick off our Truth Team fundraiser in a historic way and bring biblical truth to this nation in need. Give online at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.